Well, good afternoon, YouTube. This is Chuck, and it's Sunday, July 27th, 2025, about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and kind of a toasty day out here. It's about 95. So I'm here in the man cave, and I figured I'd bring you something a little different today. I figured I'd bring you a firefighter story, but what prompted this was give you a little bit of backstory, and that is in the fire business, a lot of times Sunday's a quiet day, and in many departments there's no assigned real project work or anything on Sundays, and it's kind of a laid back day, so the crew just kind of chills unless there's calls, and that's kind of the way it works here. And so as I say, a lot of times Sundays are quiet. Well, this morning here in town, they had just a whole flurry of activity, and I thought I would tell you a little bit about it because it seemed a little unusual. And within from about 9 a.m. to about 10 a.m., they had every single unit area was out on unrelated calls at the same time, and they were literally going call to call. So let me tell you a little bit about part of it. And our town has 3 fire stations, so 3 engine companies, and the little place next to us, Star Valley, they have 1 station with 1 engine company, and everybody's on what we call automatic aid and central dispatch, so they all work essentially like one fire department. Well, around 9 o'clock or so, the Star Valley engine got dispatched to a heart patient. And that's not unusual. They're all Paramedic-level engine companies, and about 80% of the call volume is medical. So it's not, and we have a lot of retired people here, so we have a lot of calls related to the retired population. So it's not an unusual call at all. Well, they got over there and they found a patient with extremely low heart rate. Well, that basically means they're going to have a pacemaker, and that means that they don't do that here at our hospital, not on a weekend especially. And so that means they're going to get a helicopter ride to a heart hospital in the Phoenix area. So they called for a helicopter, and ironically, one of the normal helicopter that would cover that area was actually on another flight already. And so the other helicopter, the one that's based out of the hospital, they took the call. So anyway, they transported that patient to the helipad so they could be flown to a Phoenix area hospital. And once again, I've talked about this before, but our hospital here is part of a network, and the Banner Network in Arizona, and the Banner Network's a pretty large operation, and they have specialty hospitals for just about everything you can think of. And so, if you have somebody that's going to have emergency heart surgery or whatever, it's about a 30-minute helicopter ride to get them to that specialty hospital, and that's pretty important. Well, anyway, about the time they were transporting or working that call, then they got another call out in their area again. And so one of the town engines went out there, the East Side engine, engine 13. They went out to take that call. Well, that call turned out to be a fall injury with a compound hip fracture. Now, if you don't know the difference what a compound fracture is, if you break an arm, that's a simple fracture, but when bone's sticking through the skin, that's a compound fracture. So that's a pretty serious fracture. Compound hip fracture is bad. And once again, then they got to go someplace to a trauma center. So then they called a second helicopter. Well, by that time, the other helicopter from here, they were on their way back from their flight, and so they took that call. So that's 2 calls, serious medical calls, in that little tiny community, both requiring helicopter transport. Well, then one of the town engines gets dispatched to another medical call for a patient with an altered level of consciousness, and that's pretty common as well. That could be a stroke, it could be a lot of things. Well, then the other patient engine got a call somewhere, and I happened to be out of the room at the time, so I'm not sure what that call was. But what that meant was that all four of those engines were out on calls, unrelated, simultaneous medical calls, all at the same time on a Sunday morning. That's a little bit unusual. It does happen. Well, it didn't stop there. Just as soon as the Star Valley engine 21, as soon as they cleared, as soon as the helicopter left with their patient, and they went in service again, then they were immediately dispatched to another call here in town. And if you hear them talking in the background, Engine 11's out on a power line call right now. Somebody's RV took down a power line. But anyway, so they ended up going to that call, and that one, and I didn't catch what that was, but it required a helicopter as well. And both of our helicopters were gone on flights. And so they ended up calling one out of Cottonwood, which is about 60 miles from here. So it's about a 30-minute flight to get over here. And they ended up flying that patient. So that was a period of about an hour. There's 5 different calls involving 3 helicopters and 3 pretty serious deals, all unrelated, all simultaneous. And that's a little bit unusual. So I want to tell you about that. And what I would say, let me also say that, when I've often said that when firefighters come to work in the morning, they have no idea what their day's going to bring. And I just absolutely love that about the business. And I was a responder for 34 years in 4 different communities, including 22 years here with Payson Fire Department. Well, anyway, a little bit later in the afternoon, the northside engine, engine 12, they got dispatched to a location up in our industrial park up near the airport for 2 people that were locked in a vehicle. Well, how does that happen? Well, that apparently some kind of mechanical thing happened, and they couldn't get the doors unlocked in the vehicle they were in. So Engine 12 went up there to take care of that. Well, that triggered a memory of a couple of calls that I was involved in. And I figured I would tell you a little bit about those, because both of them were kind of unique, and the one was kind of comical. But the first one occurred, quite a few years ago, probably back in the 80s sometime. And we were dispatched to a report of a car fire, smoke in the vehicle, with people trapped. And it was about 2 miles north of town, and we were only running from one station at the time, so it was a pretty long run for us. And so I responded as chief officer on the call, and when we got out there, the people were standing outside the vehicle, and the vehicle was full of smoke, and they had managed to get out. But what turned out to be kind of an interesting thing is, it turned out that there were a couple from England. And they were obviously pretty wealthy people. I mean, you could tell the way they were dressed. And the car they were driving was a very, very high-end car. It was a Jaguar. And if you wonder why I pronounced it that way, it's because here in the United States, we tend to call them Jaguars. But the proper pronunciation actually is Jaguar. And that's what they call them in England. And it's the way it's spelled, and you pronounce it the way it's spelled. Well, anyway, they were driving a pretty high-end Jaguar. And the back seat caught on fire while they're driving. And when they went to get out of the car, they pulled over a couple miles north of town in a wide spot, and they went to get out of the car, and the doors were locked, and they couldn't get the doors unlocked. And so they were trapped in there. And this was before cell phones, and somebody had stopped to see what they needed, and they said, go to town, call, whatever, and so that's when they came to town and called emergency services. Well, in the meantime, they'd figured out that they put the windows down. The windows worked. So they were older people, and she was a little bit on the chunky side, and so they, I'm sure it was pretty tough for them to crawl out the window, but they crawled out the window, and they got kind of a snoot full of smoke. But they, at least they got out of the car. And the back seat was smoldering. So we put the fire out. That wasn't an issue. Well, what it turned out to be is, that car was made in England. Back in those days especially, they were made in England. And it was in the middle of the summer here, and it was pretty stinking hot. And those cars were not designed for our Arizona summers. And the heat from their catalytic converter underneath the car had radiated enough heat through the bottom of the floor that it actually caught the back seat on fire. Now, it was just smoldering. We managed to put it out without any significant damage to the car other than the back seat. But, they, if they'd have been, it took everything they could do. Like I say, they were older people. It took everything they could do to crawl through that window. And he was, as you can understand, he was pretty upset with the car company for that. And, and they, like I say, it turned out when we were talking to him, and he said that they were over here touring the United States for 3 months, and they actually had their car shipped over here so they could drive their own car here in the States. And that was pretty amazing. But that's the first one I wanted to tell you about. And the second one, and this one happened when I was actually working as an interim fire chief in another community. And we were dispatched to a report of a woman trapped in a car in the middle of one of our major intersections. And so we thought that, originally, of course, we thought it was an accident. We got over there, and it wasn't an accident. And what had happened is that here again, it was hot in the summertime. And when the light changed and she started to drive through the intersection, all of a sudden her car quit right in the middle of the intersection. And the engine started smoking. And she tried to get out of the car, and her doors wouldn't unlock. Well, I got there a little bit before the engine did. And so I went up to the car, and she's full-blown panic. She thinks it's going to blow up like they do in the movies, and she's going to burn to death and all this kind of stuff because the engine was smoking. And so, so I told her, the doors won't unlock. The doors won't unlock. And it was an old Cadillac, an older model Cadillac. And so I'm standing there by the driver's window, talking to her through the window, yelling at her, because the car won't run, it won't move. The engine's smoking, and the doors won't unlock. Well, they had a manual unlock, which was a big chrome lever, and it was right there, and I could see the one on the passenger door. So I'm telling her, I says, put your hand on the door, move your hand toward the front of the car. See that chrome lever? Pull that lever. Well, she pulled that lever, and that was the manual door unlock. And the little knobs popped up, and the door opened, and she got out. And she was still panicky. And so I calmed her down a little bit. And about the time the engine rolled up, she got calmed down enough so she wasn't screaming anymore. But she'd driven that car. She bought that car new. And she'd driven that for several years anyway. And she had never once known that little chrome lever unlocked the doors. She had always used the power door lock and unlock feature to unlock the doors. Well, the crew got there, and we opened the hood, and what happened is her battery shorted out and gone bad. And so she didn't have any power, and so the power locks wouldn't work. There was no damage to the car. It was just a bad battery. And we were actually able to take the thing out of gear and push it by hand across the intersection. Of course, it blocked a big major intersection right in town. But we were able to push it across the intersection into a parking lot until she could call a tow truck to come get it and take it to the shop and fix it. So she was unscathed. The car wasn't damaged, but she'd driven that car for a long time and never knew that little lever would unlock the doors. And we got kind of a laugh about that. But once again, she'd older lady, and she didn't handle emergencies very well. So that's a little bit about what happened today, and a couple stories from way back when, and I haven't told a firefighter story in quite a while. But like I said, when you come to work in the morning, you never know what's going to happen that day, and I loved the challenge of that, and I thrived on that, in that atmosphere. And I used to tell people, 10 minutes from now, you'll be at a heart attack trying to decipher what all those little bumps on the heart monitor mean. And a few minutes later, then you go to a car wreck and you're trying to remember whether that particular car has boron steel in the roof pillars, so you know whether or not your cutters will cut it or not. And then a little bit later, you might be up at the airport and you might have to try to remember where the fuel shutoff is on a Cessna. And that's just the way a firefighter's life works. And I loved it. if I was younger, I'd still be riding a fire truck somewhere. So let me wrap this one up, and let me tell you that, as I always do, take care of each other and love each other and be grateful for what you have. And next time you see a fire crew somewhere and they're not on an emergency call, tell them thanks for what they do, because there's some very, very dedicated people out there, and they're working 24/7, 365, just trying to make our life a little better and make our lives a little safer. So until I talk to you again, let me just tell you for now, peace out.